want to share a fun fact. Today is when today is the same day back in '87 when Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors came out. And I was making the joke earlier, oh cool, Dream Warriors is 9 months older than me. Ew, wait. So.
Alrighty. So welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are on Inside Movies Galore, episode number 56. And we are here in the room going to talk about James Mangold's Logan from 2017, this last year, that some of us believe to be the best movie of the year, and some of us do not. So, Brandon, why don't you give us a little bit of a lowdown on what you think that this film is about?
I think this is a film about not coming of age, but just of getting older, of moving on in a society that no longer needs you. Society has moved on. You have been left behind. The changing of the guard, so to speak. That's really what makes that film such a strong film in my mind. Though I don't consider it the best film of 2018.
17.
Or 17, yeah, whatever. But it is definitely... Actually, yeah, Black Panther came out this year, so I can say it. I do feel like this is the best comic book movie of 2017.
Okay. And when did you first see this film? Did you see it in the movie theater, or did you run out to see it? Or
I had to see it in theaters, and then of course I had to get the steelbook of it. It was.
Oh, you got that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I had to, and then I missed it because it was one of those few that turned out to be rare. But I do have a copy of it that I got for a small amount. But to me, I felt like I heard some early stuff about it that's like, this is not going to be like the other Wolverine movies, which are terrible. This one actually is really good, really different, and that brought me to this movie, and I was incredibly impressed by just the quality of the acting. I really do feel like this was a good swan song for the current Wolverine actor, though he might be coming back as a character. But I really think this should be his swan song for the character because it really was probably his best performance. And Patrick Stewart as well. I mean, this really was where everybody brought their A game, acting, directing. It's just overall, I thought that was just one of the best comic book movies, especially in that franchise.
Okay.
No kidding.
Red Raven. How did you? Was this your first time seeing the film?
Yeah, this was my first time seeing it.
Okay.
And I really liked it. I thought it was a really good movie. I guess I heard, I don't know if this is, I think this is true, when it came out, at the time, Disney didn't own the rights yet to Fox.
Correct.
And so they weren't able to use some of the characters from the original comic.
Okay.
And so that's why, if you read the original comic, it's not all originally taken. The storyline isn't all originally from the comic. It doesn't match up to the comic per se.
Okay.
Yeah, it's based off of Old Man Logan, right?
Right. Yeah.
Not at all, actually. Very loosely.
Very loosely, yeah. But then later on, Disney ended up buying Fox, but this was after the movie was already made.
Yeah. We knew about the Disney Fox. As soon as we get like Disney's Alien, that's when you know it's time to split your wrists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
but also they
did you what did you find that was what was your favorite scene of the film that you would say?
I can't really think of anything that I guess the scenes where Laura. What was her? Was her name was Laura?
Yeah.
X-23, yeah.
Yeah, X-23. When she first like started attacking people, and you didn't know that she was like a mutant yet. Like they didn't know that she was a mutant, and she first started attacking everyone. I guess that was probably my favorite scene.
Okay. Katie, was this a first time watch or a rewatch?
This was a rewatch for me. I had actually seen Logan in the theater.
Okay.
So I picked up on a few things that I didn't the first time around and thought about it more. It was a movie that I enjoyed overall. I typically don't really care for the superhero movies, the comic book movies, not really my thing. But for a brief time back in the 90s, I did read some of the X-Men comics and was kind of into drawing them as a kid. So I knew I have a little bit of backstory about Wolverine, but probably, I mean, you don't need any for this movie for it to be impactful. But I think if I had more backstory on his character, it might have been more impactful for me. But there was other aspects of the movie that didn't really have anything necessarily to do with his character per se, but just generalizations that I liked, like how socially perceptive I thought it was, because they touch on some things that are issues for people, like the elder care of Professor X, how he's aging and getting so old, and the role that Logan takes in caretaking for him, that, and also the way that society treats the mutants, and that real kind of discrimination that they still face, and basically wipe it. They're entirely wiped out at this point anyway. It's so far into the future, there's hardly any left. So I thought that was really neat, just the social commentary on that type of stuff. And and also I thought that Logan was kind of like that deadbeat dad kind of figure, I guess, where you could see he really struggled to make that connection to who he knew was his daughter, like, because he was such a hopeless character. He struggled really hard with that. So those are some things I picked up that made this movie interesting to me personally. Like, I wouldn't typically like it for the, like I said, for the character aspect, because I'm not that into the X-Men movies, or I can't compare it to really any of the other X-Men movies because I just haven't seen them. So yeah, just looking at it as a standalone, those are some of the things that jumped out at me. And I enjoyed that it was like a rated R thing. I mean, I've seen a lot of the other comic book movies that have come out and stuff. My kid is really into them.
Okay.
My boyfriend's into them. So I end up watching them anyway. But I enjoyed a movie like this much more, no spandex tights, suits. Like, it was grittier, and I appreciated that.
Okay. Dave, this is apparently one of your favorites. Why don't you tell us when you first saw the film?
Well, I saw it in the theater back in April of last year, and I had heard a lot of people saying that it was their favorite superhero film, and I was like, even more than The Dark Knight, which people cannot shut up about, and I was like, well, that's pretty high praise. Wow. And I saw it, and I was really blown away by it, and I thought it did live up to the hype. When I said that it was my favorite, or I said best of 2017, I said it was the best one that I saw. There's a lot of critically acclaimed films that I haven't seen from 2017, which is my own fault, kind of laying down the job. But I think it was the best movie 2017 that I saw, and it's my favorite superhero film that I've ever seen. The level of pathos, hard-hitting drama, great character moments, and violence that actually resonates and counts. And the fact that it's a journey, it's a father-daughter story, it's a getting older story. It hits on a lot of really great levels, and for me, it worked in the same way that something like Breaking Bad works. It actually reminded me a lot of Breaking Bad stylistically. and in terms of its tone. Obviously, completely different subject matter. And I'll also go on record saying that Wolverine is not at all a personal favorite character of mine. And yet I thought this was utterly spectacular in every way. It's the kind of film that I would love to make, as far as something that carries a lot of weight and just is filled with really earned pathos.
Okay. Dustin, was this a rewatch or a first-time watch?
So I saw it for the first time last night, and then I watched it again today, and I was really impressed by it. I mean, I'd heard a lot of high-minded praise for the film, and it really lived up to how it was billed. Like, it was less of a superhero movie and more of a serious drama. And it worked very well as a drama. Like, you could not tell someone it's a superhero movie, and until Wolverine started stabbing people, which admittedly happens pretty quick, they'd be like, "Oh, all right." Like, I'd agree with the comparison to The Dark Knight in how it sort of transcends its own genre.
It does, but this is still a superhero film at its core. I'd say the difference is that this is like it's what a hard, gritty superhero film should be. I always got the sense with the Dark Knight trilogy that they were trying hard not to be superhero movies and try to get past the fact that they had a man dressed up as a bat and all that stuff, instead of like really embracing it. With the X-Men, it's like you pretty much don't have any choice because your characters are mutants and they have powers. But that being said, this did ground itself in what every film, not just superhero films, every film should ground itself in, which is the characters.
Right, and well, when it comes to The Dark Knight, at least, I'm kind of ignoring Batman Begins and Dark Knight Rises,
Yeah.
because those two, the first and last films in that trilogy, didn't really do as good a job as The Dark Knight did with that theme. So
Well, that and The Dark Knight, just by the way it's written, is it's kind of the black sheep of that trilogy, in the sense that what happens in the film doesn't have that much that affects the rest of the series, and it does kind of thematically and even stylistically stand out from the other two.
Right, and it's, well, in simpler terms, I would simply say it's just not as good as, I would say the other two aren't as good as The Dark Knight. But back to Logan, like, I was really happy I saw Logan, and shout out to the friend of mine who let me borrow his 4K copy, because that was nice.
Looking at what the director has come from, he directed Copland from 1997, Girl Interrupted from 1999, Kate and Leopold from 2001, Walk the Line from 2005, 310 to Yuma from 2007, Night and Day, which was kind of gay. At least to me at the time. But you know, he also directed the Wolverine standalone film before this. So coming off the aspect of that story, I mean, some of us have seen it, some not.
Yeah.
Me myself, I come from. I remember when the X-Men came out as a cartoon, and I watched the 1990s, cartoon show about it. And I remember when Jubilee came out, and I remember collecting the X-Men trading cards. I remember when that was a fad.
Oh yeah.
Besides Pog.
I semi-missed some of that stuff. Like, I'd see an episode or two of the show here and there, but it would always be like part 3 of a 10-part story arc, and I'd have no idea what's going on.
This was even before the X-Men films even existed.
This was in the 90s.
I grew up on that show, and
they had marketing tools even before the X-Men men films came out. So
yeah, I remember that too.
So to me, growing up with that aspect of it, I was already invested, so somewhat to an extent. But my first time seeing Logan was not in the theater. I did not want to go run out and see it. See it. I wanted to see it on my own, so I did, and I watched it with my fiance, which could have been last summer or whatnot, probably. And I did not like it at first. I thought it was depressing. I thought the kids were way too young for what I was thinking. Because I remembered on the show, on the cartoon show, that yeah, there were characters that were younger, but they were more of a teenage age.
Yeah, it depends because, like, sometimes the mutation manifests during puberty, which is, of course, what furthers the metaphor. But then other
The
times,
children were never that young in the cartoon show, and I guess that's not the.
well, and there's been plenty of mutants that have been children. I mean, you know,
Have
X-Men, the
But
X-Men
after
films have
the
young
cartoon,
children.
after the
There's,
cartoon show, you know.
well, I don't know. I think that's kind of a not
weird.
that argument doesn't really hold water if you know even
That's
just
a weird complaint. I agree.
well, even if you know the movies, let alone the comics, in which you know there are plenty of mutants that are children, and even if you just look at the movie on its own merits, they were cloning children specifically to be killing machines. So, regardless, they were trying to obviously bring out their you know killing instincts early.
That this time around, I understood it a little bit more. See, because what every time I see a movie, I like to watch it again before I give my my total, thoughts or whatnot. That's why I don't think I've reviewed it myself yet on my own site. So it's more or less, it wasn't one of those ones that I expected. And this time around, I was looking at Patrick Stewart's character. And now I had actually seen several films that he had been in, besides Star Trek and besides Logan and whatnot. And I seem to remember a one where he played in a movie called Safe House with Kimberly Williams back in the '90s, and he played there. He used to be like some secret agent or whatnot, and he had this fail-safe machine that he always had to go and remember. Well, he was playing an aging man who was starting to develop Alzheimer's. But he, in order to keep all the secrets that he had to go to this machine every time. But he kept losing his mind, and that, me remembering this film kind of reminds me of his role in this film, and the fact that he is an aging man, he is losing his capability to remember, even the ability to breathe, and that's what I take from this. And hearing what Brandon said about the fact that this is about growing older and the changing of the guards, I can see that now. Seeing the film after the fact and hearing what others say about it. It's not that.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, let's not forget that it's a way. This film, it does a lot of stuff that even the comics, as far as I know, hadn't touched on. Like, for example, let's say that Professor X did grow old and did have some kind of mental trouble, whether it was Alzheimer's or whether it was dementia or something like that. And someone of his strength, his powers of a mutant, would be a severe danger to everyone around him, which this goes into. And let's not also forget that one of the things I found most interesting about the film is just the idea that because the whole arc of the at least the movies, if not comics, but the movies for sure kind of set this up. The idea that every however many years, a mutation leaps forward, and then there's the next stage. Well, I kind of like the idea that maybe this wave of mutants, maybe their time is up, and it's no one's fault except nature. Maybe in fact they weren't able to last as long as was thought. Maybe they weren't the next stage of human evolution. Maybe they just were a failed mutation, literally, in the evolutionary sense. And in which
Like
case,
it just kind of happened and petered out.
yeah, basically, and you kind of see the idea that not only are there very, very few mutants left, but the exploits of the X-Men, who of course were so feared and hated, that they now are not only celebrated in the world of comics, which I thought was really cool as a shout out to the comics in the first place, but the fact that their exploits are being treated as if they were fictional, or rather, they're these characters who in that world really did exist. They're being trivialized and fictionalized, and controlled, made into objects of folklore and all that. So it's just interesting that despite being hated and despite being almost eradicated by xenophobic humans, that in fact they might have just been a failed mutation, and there's no one really to blame for it, and it's just kind of their time to bow out as a species. It's just kind of, and it's an interestingly dispassionate approach to that, on top of just Wolverine himself getting older.
Well, they did make a comment on that. Like the doctor was talking about how they found a way to basically not have mutants' genes activate so that they would become mutants.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounded like to me that there was never a problem with the mutants themselves. Like mutants were still around. It's just their powers never manifested because of some overarching conspiracy to like tinker with their genetics.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were talking that it was in the food. They kind of hinted at that
Exactly.
It was like in the corn products that they were consuming, the corn syrup or whatever. Junk food was killing the mutants.
Well, it wasn't killing them. It was just like not turning their genes on. So I kind of wonder now that that guy's dead, what are we going to see happen?
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
I did want to add something that you made me think of, Dane, when you were talking about the mutants kind of being celebrated and sort of becoming extinct, and it sort of reminded me of some of the parallels to how Native Americans in this country are still sort of treated like these mascots, like these fictional characters that once existed and no longer do. Like I saw that social parallel there with the mutants.
Yeah,
well.
there's that, and then there's also like
X-Men.
Whether it's Native Americans, whether it's any group of people that is hated and despised, and then enough time goes by, and there's either few enough of them to be trivialized and kind of fictionalized, fetishized almost, or they're a group of people who are still around, and they just over the passage of time sort of grandfathers them into acceptance. It's an odd social phenomenon.
Well, I specifically saw the parallel with Native Americans in the, when you think about the mutants being fantasized and put into comic books and sort of treated in that way. I think I don't see that with a lot of other other cultures, that in this country especially we fantasize the Native American, like from what we see, those Hollywood images that we see, and it's like still we have major sports teams that will use Native American stereotypical imagery and offensive words to describe their teams, and it's like still these people being treated like they no longer exist. Like it's okay to just make a comic book about them, and that's all they are.
In a sense, being a mutant is almost like being of a different color race. Almost.
Yeah. Well, right. That's the parallel.
That's the direct allegory. Yeah, that was intentional.
That always has been
all throughout the Marvel or the X-Men universe, and I think it's kind of played both ways on both sensibilities. And I think that's why a lot of people generate towards these stories of the X-Men, people with different capabilities and whatnot. I mean, it would be really cool to be able to, be a metal man or freeze people, or of that nature. And I think that's what people gain out of watching a superhero film is someone who can do something better than themselves and either save the universe or try to condemn it.
Well, and
It's like,
also
what if our disability was a strength? Yeah.
well, and also not to mention the fact that race and minority differences that was always there at the core of the X-Men from the very beginning. During because the X-Men came into existence in a decade where Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were both alive, both causing tremendous ruckus and uproar in the social societies of the 60s South and just 60s America in general. And you have, I think that, Professor X was regarded as being sort of like Martin Luther King Jr. and,
Magneto was Malcolm
like
X.
Malcolm X, yeah. Which the funny part is that both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they started to kind of come towards the middle before they both died. And it's kind of like how, Professor X and Magneto both start, and this happens in the comics at various stages too, that they kind of have alliances, or where Professor X dies at one point and asks Magneto to lead the X-Men, or like in the movie adaptation of Days of Future Past, you have them on the same side because they're being eradicated and that kind of stuff.
But,
And
probably to go up against the greatest evil, that type of thing.
yeah, of course. And so yeah, race and all that stuff is always at the heart of the X-Men, no matter what. And the really interesting thing about Logan is that you have all that as a subtext, but then the theme of that film is about not only getting older but dying and learning to hold on to and care for something other than yourself, and
Exactly.
really understanding what does that mean, because you can say that oh, you learn to that's the classic loner story. It's Han Solo. It's the character who looks out for themselves and learns that there's something greater than them to fight for and all that stuff. Except that in here, it's his own daughter, in effect. It's someone who, by all accounts, should not be a parent, and yet is in that position and realizes that he, for the first time, can feel real love, even beyond the love of his old teammates, which even then it's not quite the same thing. And
So, what do you
Yeah,
think?
that was one of the conscious theme. That was one of the things that they talked about in the commentary, where they're trying to figure out what do they have, like, what would scare Logan, like, what would be a challenge? What would be a challenge for him? And like learning to love other people was what they went with, and they did a great job with it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that that's a very relatable theme because, I mean, most people don't have children of their own flesh and blood dumped on their doorstep, without them expecting it or knowing about it or anything like that. But there are a lot of people who have children that they planned on having, and yet they're obviously not ready to be parents. They got a lot of living yet to do, and yet they have a kid, and yet they have their own interests, and yet they maybe have a dire family situation, all these different things. And it's sort of how does that person learn how to love? Maybe they didn't have a family of their own. Maybe they didn't know what love was and that sort of thing. And so I think that's another reason why people would relate to it, on top of the fact that just background, I'm a huge fan of violence in films. Not really necessarily violence that is just there for its own sake, because after a while that can get kind of boring. But I think whenever you use violence right in a story, it can be some of the most powerful things that you can put on film. And I feel like this movie got that because it had exciting action when it needed to be, but even within that, every single act of violence carried a lot of weight, kind of like a samurai film. And
You could
you
say
know,
that, yeah.
definitely. And so that is always like the classical, at least, well, not classical. The modern master of that is Mel Gibson because his movies are extremely violent, but every act of violence carries a lot of weight.
I saw Apocalypto last week.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
I would somewhat disagree with that assessment
Wow.
because
Well,
a lot of the stuff in Apocalypto felt openly gratuitous.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree there because he's trying to portray a society that has literally cannibalized itself, and where violence is a matter of day-to-day life, not only in terms of surviving, but in terms of trying to come up with an answer for why their society is dying. And and the Mayans were very, very violent people, as evidenced by the human sacrifice and that sort of thing. So I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. I think it's just kind of a matter of history for their people specifically, and for the human, for larger, a larger implication of the human race in general. But
I would say that Mel Gibson is more of a visual director, as far as showing some of the violence,
yeah,
without showing it.
well, he tends to treat violence not only with each act of violence carrying some kind of really important weight in the story, but each I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the term the aesthetic. Well, the
Aestheticism.
yes, yeah, aesthetic, whatever. In other words, you make violence appealing to the senses, and
Yeah.
I think he's a master of knowing how to do that. And I do think James Mangold did that well here, except I think that Mel Gibson tends to be a bit more lyrical in his
Approach.
in his approach, especially in something like The Passion of the Christ, where there's a lot of slow motion and everything is treated in a way sort of like a ballet of pain in a way.
I guess they're making a Passion of the Christ too.
The word what's gonna happen in Passion of the Christ too? Does he like get off the cross and like kick some ass? Like what is this?
Well, this time you make the Cenobites.
Cenobites.
Crossover with Hellraiser.
It's what happens on his journey into it.
And I feel like this movie got that as much as within the context of the superhero film, because it does have really great action, but it's not each action, not just every violent action, but each action propels the story forward and is treated like its own special event,
Now,
Yeah, that was something they mentioned in the commentary. They said they were really freed up by the R rating, not just and they said that when people think of the R rating, that everyone always assumed it was because, oh, you can be more violent, you can show this, you can show that. They said that the real thing that they were excited about was being open to having like more adult like conversations and content, like being able to deal with those themes of like death and aging in a way that they wouldn't be able to have the pacing or room or latitude if it was like a movie that was geared more for children. So
well, and that's also why I loved, as far as like the R-rated superhero film, which technically Deadpool came 1 year before that, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's a new thing." No, it's not. The Crow did that. The Sin City's not superhero, but comic book. That movie did that. 300 did that. All these other movies, whatever that was, Dark Man did that. There's a ton of other ones. But with Deadpool, that was a movie where I felt like the R rating was really just there to kind of. I mean, I know Deadpool, the characters like this. It's just like it's there to be kind of smart ass and to be to really be gratuitous, but in a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of way, which is, it's good in its doses. I don't really like Deadpool as a character that much, but it was good in its justice, but like you said, I think that when your R rating goes towards the real things that make a story work, which are the themes, then that's really what makes a great film. And the violence goes along with that oftentimes, but that's why I wanted to distinguish the two
Did
there.
Deadpool come out in the same year?
No,
Yeah, I think it came out like a month or two.
nope,
I think it was like, didn't Deadpool come out in February and Logan come out in March?
nope. Deadpool came out in 2016.
Yeah, I was saying Deadpool came out the previous year.
Oh, it did?
Yep, it came out
Yeah.
early previous
Well,
year.
goddamn.
Actually, I think that's one of the factors that made them certain that the R could work. But I wanted to go back to one of the themes before I felt like it kind of got left behind and went to lose on that, which was the theme of the samurai.
Mhm.
When you're talking about weaving of violence. And there were two themes, and we had talked about this a little bit last week about a Western theme and a samurai theme, the lone hero. It's very similar, and of course, in both genres, as you get to see with the similarities, where you see the similarities from the spaghetti westerns to Kurosawa. Other than the spaghetti westerns, a lot of them copied Kurosawa. But the Wolverine has always been associated with that culture, with the samurai culture as a Ronin. Somebody with his own odd but definitive honor system, always on his own, always carrying his own weight upon his shoulders, either looking at him as that definitive samurai character or without a master, or looking at him as that lone cowboy, a la Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name type character. Those are really how the character is presented. Oh, also wanted to let you all know that despite my praise for it, Wolverine was actually one of my least favorite comic book characters.
Yeah.
Which for me to actually praise the character that much in this particular takes a lot for me.
Yeah, I thought he was a very he has a lot to him, but I always thought he was too popular, and I thought he was very overrated as a character. But I will contend, I think he's a much better character than Deadpool.
Damn, that hurt. I was just gonna say that my favorite thing about Wolverine, at least before I'd seen this movie, was how he was responsible for us getting Lobo. Which Lobo is a parody of Wolverine done by DC, he's kind of like Wolverine crossed with Deadpool. He's kind of wonderful in every way.
I like Lobo as a parody character because those kind of characters can get kind of old, and that's, I guess, why I think Lobo works, just because he is ultimately a parody of those kind of characters.
And like, he knows what he is too, and they always have fun with him. Like, there was a really insane series of comics that came out. It was Looney Tunes crossovers with DC. However, they were done like dead serious, like draw the Looney Tunes characters as real characters and give them real stories. And this particular crossover was, it was like Lobo and Wile E. Coyote. So it's hard to summarize because it's so bizarre. But essentially, it gives like a backstory to like the Coyote and the Roadrunner. Like, they're both like escapees from some lab. And somehow Lobo runs into the Coyote. Like, Lobo is coming to Earth to like is on his way to go kill somebody, and the Coyote really wants to kill the Roadrunner, and so they do like a strangers on a train thing. It's like, okay, I'll go kill your Roadrunner, you go kill this guy. And the Roadrunner manages to get Lobo to kill himself a few times before Lobo gives up. And Wile E. Coyote ends up, turns out he was sent to kill like a Green Lantern, and so he's just on Oa getting like his ass beat. And in the resolution of the story, they're like, you're pretty tough. Like, you want to stay and become a Lantern? It's like, I'm too old. I've got stuff to do. And it ends with while Wile E. Coyote was there, he stole a Green Lantern ring, and he's going to go after the Roadrunner with that. You have to read them to believe them, like, but they're all really fucking good. There's like a detective noir story with Elmer Fudd and Batman that you wouldn't believe turns out so well. There's a Jonah Hex and Yosemite Sam like do a thing, and it's honestly pretty fucking good. It's like, I hate westerns. Read this. Okay, this was a cool western. So it just makes me think of the stuff like that, like how you can explore different themes in comics.
Okay.
Even with something so silly as like Looney Tunes characters, as long as you treat the material with respect, which is what we really saw in this. Like, they took everything dead serious. There were no like really cute moments aside from like the little kid like picking out clothes, which, that's fine. You needed some moments of levity in there.
Well, I think treating the material with respect touches on something that was mentioned earlier about when you're talking about like people not necessarily being the age that they were, or that they reflected a lot in the comics. That actually was something that, and I'll admit, that used to play a huge part, because I was a big into comics from the 80s up until the early 2000s, when I said, okay, it's too expensive, I'm off. But the fact is, after the first X-Men movie, and to this day, I cannot bring myself to fully like the first X-Men movie, because I was hoping for something that would be true to the comics. And I almost felt like it was a spit in the eye of the comics when I originally saw it. Since then, I've managed to look at it and say, okay, well, they're not going to make it true to the comics. When you look at some of the characters, like they had Richter as one of the little kids, and some other ones that would have been like New Mutants or X-Force members in the comic books. But some of those things, when you got to kind of say, you know what, this is not going to follow any continuity from the comics, or just going to pay a slight homage to it.
It'll be characters from the comics. Yeah.
Well, I kind of almost have to go into these movies watching them with a blank mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you have to understand that it's an adaptation, and it's not, not only that, but even if they do a specific story like Days of Future Past, or like, like the Dark Knight trilogy, those are based on a lot of clear,
or like the Dark Knight Returns, like the animated version they did.
That, or even like Batman v Superman, which takes a lot of inspiration from certain elements of
Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
They just managed to totally fuck every aspect of it and get it wrong and bad.
See, that's what makes the DC animated universe very different from the Marvel, the live action. The animated universe is much truer to the comics and the source material, whereas the movies is more true, especially in the DC universe, it's more true to the executives and the planners that are trying to find out. I really think that Logan got that gritty level that DC had been trying to reach for over and over again, and kept failing since Dark Knight.
Well, and I would even argue, even with Dark Knight, I felt like that series and that film in particular was trying so hard to be gritty, trying so hard to be realistic, trying so hard to be kind of have this strange kind of poeticism in the dialogue and stuff, that it takes itself to such a serious degree that it comes off as kind of silly in certain aspects when it doesn't mean to, which is where something like Logan to me really shined, because it is serious, but it doesn't ever get too wrapped up in its own seriousness. It just does what it does. And that to me is the best way to do it, because I felt like, especially with the Dark Knight, like they really got wrapped up in their own specialness and in their own poeticism to a degree that I was like, okay, this is kind of detracting from the themes a little bit, as opposed to Logan, which didn't really have to try. It just did. It just did the story.
So if they make another movie after this, Laura could potentially be the next Wolverine if they decide to follow the comic.
Well, if they decided to keep that storyline going, yeah, because I know that there are going to be more X-Men movies. Obviously, I just know that if you do establish a series chronology, that this would be at the end, at least the end of what is currently on the
Yeah.
books. But
I thought this would have been a perfect place to end the continuity because since Disney has the X-Men now, I feel like they're gonna want to do their own completely different thing with it. So if this had to be the last X-Men movie in that old continuity set out by Fox, then I think they went out on the best possible note.
yeah,
Yes.
I think they'll eventually return to the X-Men storyline, except I think it'll be more of a reboot to try
Exactly, that's what they're gonna do.
try to reboot the series in some way, just like they did the Spider-Man series after Andrew Garfield's mishap or whatnot.
Well, Hugh Jackman's is pretty much done now, right? I mean, that was his last movie with them, right?
Well, supposedly there's twittering going on about whether he's returning or not. Right, Brandon?
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's been some chatter back and forth, and we'll see what ultimately happens.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know that Hugh Jackman himself has said that he really does not want to come back. He really didn't want to come back as Logan.
Well, he killed it though, so I mean, I can see why he wouldn't want to. You can't go anywhere else with the character after that performance.
Yeah, I don't think you could either.
He would come back as an Avenger, I think.
Well,
he said if they made that happen, but it sounds like they won't do the Avenger thing and have Wolverine be an Avenger, but he said he'd come back for that.
Two things that I wanted to talk about briefly were the fact that Logan is the first superhero film to ever be nominated for any of the screenplay Oscars, which is a big deal. Not even a Dark Knight was in there for its year. So that's I think a big step forward for the genre in terms of achieving legitimacy. But one thing I kind of knew was going to happen, but I was still kind of miffed about it, was the fact that the person who played X-23, I forget her name, but I thought she was utterly spectacular, and I was like, please, Academy, don't forget about her. And I totally knew that they would, but
she blew it away.
I thought that she did an exceptional job and is someone to watch out for as she grows up, because whenever you see not only great acting talent, but great acting talent from young people, it has to be acknowledged and fostered and, given its due praise.
The hardest thing is when you're a child star, oftentimes when they hit the teenage years, that's when the studios tend to forget about them. I mean, look what happened to Shirley Temple.
Yeah.
It just depends on if they can evolve or not. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't.
I mean, look at where the young kid who played in what was it? M. Night Shyamalan's The
Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense. He is now, and he got into some drug problems. It was just kind of chaotic for a little bit.
Yeah, look what happened to Anakin in Star Wars.
Yeah, Jake Lloyd, he got really messed up. I mean, that could be a whole episode about child
hopefully his giant piles of money helped in some way.
Well, the Academy doesn't really look at child stars in a serious note. It takes quite a bit. I think the last time we had one, the last times I saw any of them mentioned, there was the one from True Grit. They gave her a supporting actress nod.
Her name was Haley Steinfeld, but she was 14. But then then they gave Abigail Breslin when she was.
Oh yeah, the Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah, they gave one to her when she was really young, and then.
Gosh, what was that movie? The one
Haley Joel Osment got nominated when he was a kid, and the youngest one ever was the kid from Beast of the Southern Wild.
That's what I was thinking of. I was going to say that one with the floods. That actually was also a great performance. But again, all spectacular performances. But being in the genre of comic books has always been, especially superhero comic books, has always been looked at as a mockery by those who look at things, with great art.
Which
And-
is always hilarious that the Academy likes to put themselves on that level, and yet nowadays superhero films are the thing that's keeping Hollywood afloat. And so it's like you would think that they would want to
Pay attention.
not only pay attention, but treat these guys with respect and make them feel like royalty because they are the one genre that's keeping things alive.
Like
and,
I have
mention the fact that Warner Brothers tried really hard to get the Best Picture campaign going for Wonder Woman, which unfortunately didn't go anywhere. But you look at the boundaries and the barriers that Black Panther is breaking down right now. It's just like, guess what, guys? Not only financially does this genre keep you guys alive and pay, puts money in your kind of stuff, but it really can be great art and it can mean something to people. And just it sure meant a lot to me back when I was a kid, before there were multi-billion-dollar grossing films featuring these characters. They meant a whole lot to me. They meant a lot to generations of people who grew up reading them just on the pages. And there's something to be said for that. And it just I don't know. I do think that whenever that people like to set themselves up for a standard that's kind of unfair and impossible to meet, then you do really discredit a lot of great art that comes from a genre that you just happen to not understand.
Well, actually, I'm hoping one day to see the three great snubs that usually happen: horror, superheroes, and animation. To eventually become fully seriously, and they are gaining some ground. I mean, shoot, Get Out, for instance, is though it's kind of more artistic on that line, but it is horror, and it's got a lot of nominations this year,
which I was
good.
Pleased with. Yeah,
I
still got to see it. I'm disappointed that I haven't.
It's
I
quite
still
good.
have to see it myself too, but I know that I have a copy of it somewhere. So if
I bought the Target Steel book because I wanted to hear the commentary.
But and then the other thing, the Academy. While we're on that subject, the Academy used to have a category for. They would have to change the name these days, but they used to be Best Juvenile Performance. And they didn't do that many of them. I think I can only think of like 2 instances where they did that, or I may be wrong, but I feel like that really should become an award, just because it seems a little silly to me to put, first of all, to put children in the same category as adults, number one, and then number two, if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to put them in the same category as adults, then you need to recognize them for their own efforts, because they're, for the child actors that are out there, you gotta recognize them.
Well, it's just like the BAFTAs; they have that award for the best newcomer, which I think that's actually a great award. Even though I was sad to see that, what was her name from Twilight?
Kristen Stewart.
Yeah, getting that award that one year.
Well, apparently she's come a long way as far as
got it for Twilight
acting talent. It's. I always kind of got the sense that the actors involved with that were better than the material that they were given, and that often does happen. Where I think that's the same thing that like the 50 Shades of Grey cast kind of realizes that. That this isn't really a true test of their abilities. That happens sometimes.
No, it's the 50 Shades. It's high art. They're just not doing it right.
But you see what I mean? Like there are certain things that like I mean, Anthony Hopkins was in the latest Transformers, which the critics love to deride and say that that's not high art or that's not whatever, you know. But they were in that, and like if we're talking about superheroes, a lot of really, really accomplished stage actors and established film actors and that stuff would appear on the 60s Batman series, which was nowadays a lot of fanboys love to decry that as camp or whatever or bad or whatever, but they loved it. They loved going on that show. So it just
Yeah, a lot of the modern sensibilities are so strange. I mean, I have that problem with some of my friends. It's like, oh, let's watch this, classic horror movie that everyone loves, and it's like, it only got 2 stars on Netflix. It must be garbage. It's Hellraiser. Like, it's good. Trust me. It's like, or like they just
do we really live in the era?
Everything, like, independent.
Do we live in the era now where something like Hellraiser is considered a classic, even though it's only 30 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I guess I would still lump that in the category of like modern classic or something, but I don't know. When I think of classic, I think of way older than that. But
well, it's roughly as old as I am, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I consider it exactly like how we treat cars. Anything that's 10 years or older is classic.
well, people have a prejudice against black and white, so I'll go further than that. Any movie that's in black and white, people don't want to watch it, which I think is ludicrous. And I give George Miller and I give James Mangold a lot of credit for Mad Max Fury Road and Logan both having black and white versions on home video, and I'm like, yes, thank you.
Yeah,
for keeping it alive.
I didn't have time to see Logan Noir. How much did that enhance the experience?
I haven't watched it yet in black and white. I do want to. Same with I don't have Mad Max Fury Road Black and Chrome edition. I don't have that one yet, but I can see it a lot better with Logan than I can with Mad Max, even though I know George Miller always envisioned Fury Road as being a black and white film, except that film is so colorful that, and to me, kind of seems like it's meant to be colorful, but I could be wrong. But
it does have a lot of the same palette.
It does, but even though it is the theatrical releases of both of those are in color, you can kind of see, well, certainly not only thematically, but in the sense of like even with Mad Max, where it's in color, but the color palettes are so. You've heard of the teal and orange thing, where the reason why people do that is because orange and teal are on the opposite ends of the color wheel, and so naturally, because they're on the opposite ends, they pop a lot better because they don't blend in with each other as well. And
that's my favorite thing to do is color.
Thank Michael Bay for being on the forefront of that, just because with Transformers, which is a very like visually heavy film series that requires a lot of things to pop, then I think that was one of the earliest modern films to do that, and there's been plenty of films. Well, there have been a lot of other films that have
2 more Transformers green lighted still that still to come or something like that.
Yeah, there's more. Of course, there's more. but the thing is, like, there have been artists, for a long time that have thought about ways to make certain colors pop, and with both Logan and Mad Max Fury Road, even though they're in color, you can see that they're thinking about ways to make those colors pop, and then if you desaturate, then they would still pop in a different way. They wouldn't just wash out. And that, to me, is what I love about black and white, is the high level of contrast that you get. So that makes the whole thing, the whole frame really pop. And I love frames that come alive because of the contrast, because of especially if you use a lot of low light, then I don't know, that always gets me excited.
Okay. So is there anything else that anyone wants to add to this whole mix? Or do you think that we have covered this as a whole?
Did anybody have, did we already do favorite scenes?
If you want to go ahead and say your favorite scene, you're more than welcome to.
Well, it's somewhat difficult to pick, but I think what I prefer is the way they open the movie. Like they
Mhm.
show just they set the tone right away.
He's drunk as fuck. He wakes up and he's like, hey, "Guys, you're gonna strip the damn thing, you know?"
Well, they immediately go into like, what's the tone of this movie gonna be, and it's like it's like a low kind of, it's a low tone. Like he's passed out in the back of his truck. Truck in the back of his limo, like, and he's just tired. Like he doesn't want to like kill these guys, but yeah, as my train of thought just goes right off that cliff.
I liked all this. I honestly liked all the small moments. So like all the conversations he has with X-23. I love the very first times that we see Professor X in his decrepit state. Just kind of the flow of life. I really like
Oh,
all that
was
stuff
it.
is all that stuff is very sad to me, and I don't know. I'm also very attracted to sadness in film, and it was very sad. It was very it made you feel sad to see Professor X, this noble, wise leader of the X-Men for so many years, just absolutely
Grumbling.
at rock bottom. I did like hearing him swear, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, I mean, even so,
Logan, what did you do?
You snapped me back into it. By the way, I do remember my favorite scene now. It was when they first approach Laura in the compound. Like
Yeah.
all these like big muscly guys are just like going to try and like subdue her, and it's like, okay, what's gonna happen? Like they've been teasing that she can do stuff for a while. What's it gonna be? And then it cuts to the outside, and you just hear like screams and gunfire, and I was, oh my shit!
Well, good attention to detail with the fact that her claws are bone, because she wasn't part of the Weapon X project and didn't have her whole skeleton laced with adamantium. And
Well, she did actually. They mentioned that they gave her the same augments.
oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot that. But,
That's another cool thing. Did you notice on Logan's claws that the tips were kind of worn down, like, and sheared off, like from use?
yeah.
And then if you paid really close attention to X-24, like his claws were like pristine and new, like they were in the last movie.
Oh yeah. Well, and I really liked how they explained why she had two claws on her hands and one
One on
claw
her
in
foot.
each of her feet, which I thought that was really cool.
That was a pretty cool biology moment too. I liked that.
Because I honestly wondered that whenever I'd see her drawn. I was like, well, I know that they wanted her to be different, but I was like, why two? And that explained it, because I hadn't actually read a comic with her in it. I was more like 70s X-Men. That was kind of what I grew up on. But I really liked her characterization. She and it's funny. She and 11 in Stranger Things are not that far apart from each other.
Yeah, they kind of remind me of the same person. Yeah,
they're of the same archetype.
They're both mute for quite a while and don't speak, and I think that lends itself to the power of their acting, and their character has to have a voice without having a voice. So
well, and I
see
love
that as being
I love that. I love when characters don't have to speak unless necessary, just because if they're good actors, they can communicate everything that they need.
See, I don't always think that not speaking is always a good thing.
Wasn't she speaking Mexican at one point?
Yeah, she was.
Spanish.
Yeah, Spanish. Yeah. Sorry, sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that.
It's cool. Yeah, she was speaking Espanol.
Well, of course, she was basically raised in Mexico, so that's why she was Spanish speaking. But then you can see she also has some English kind of in there, which I was wondering how that works.
I actually think she kind of learned her English through
paying attention to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Through her relationship with Professor X. because he had
Right. I
Yeah.
wondered, did he
He had a small-
telepathically communicate with her?
Well, I really,
He said he
really
was doing it a
love
few
their,
times.
I love their relationship just because she's essentially cast out and not valued by anyone, least of all her own father, at least through most of it. And Professor X has largely been cast out of what he used to be, which is obviously the head of Professor Xavier, the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, and it's just so nice that they kind of find each other and are able to talk in a way that they can understand and that they can communicate with, and then through that, Wolverine is able to, find his heart that he never knew he had.
Actually, most of the powerful scenes I thought were with Patrick Stewart, especially towards the end, where you see that he has this moment of clarity, and some of the blocks are gone, at least temporarily, and then he realizes the weight of everything that has happened to him in the past. Without giving any major spoilers, that's about all I'm going to say. But just the performance, the power of that, the asking of forgiveness, where he breaks down, that is, to me, one of the most powerful scenes in that film.
I have to agree. And I know the other powerful moment is when Logan is looking up into her eyes as he's about to die, and he says, "Oh, that's what it feels like."
I remember that. Like, that had so much. Man, I almost cried at that. Like, it had so much meaning. It's like he's killed so many people.
And I was trying to figure out whether he meant
whether
he meant the love that he was feeling for her in that moment, or whether he meant the feeling what it's like to die.
It could have meant all of those things. It was meant to be open.
That, but it's kind of all those things plus what it feels like to be loved. Not only to feel, it's not only to feel love, but to be loved and know how that feels. Because it's a little bit like with the Wizard of Oz. It's like, and remember, my friend, and a heart is not measured by how much you love, but by how much you are loved by others. Which, if you analyze that too much, that can be a little dubious because celebrities are loved all the time, and they might not love anyone. But it's like you get the point. The point is that the amount that you receive back is often indicative of that which you put in, and I think that's when he realizes just what love really means and what family even is. And it's a great statement, stated really beautifully and powerfully.
Now, the first interpretation of that I had was that he's been effectively immortal for so long, and now that he's dying, it was just like, so this is what it's like. Because he's killed so many people and has so many things in his past that he regrets when it comes to violence.
Well, as much as he
so
can
he's
completely
on,
remember.
Well, right, and he's on the receiving end of himself. Like, he's essentially killed by his dark self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is, and by being killed by his dark self, his anger, the berserker rage inside, literally manifests, and he's able to purge himself of that darkness in order to fully embrace love and then die peacefully.
Yeah, literally by his daughter too, because she shoots him.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just like so much symbolism in it.
And I love symbolic stories like that.
Like at the end when she like changes the cross to an X, like if they had played Hurt over the credits, like right then and there, I would have cried my eyes out. Like, oh my God.
I'm glad that they didn't, because they just let that moment play out. They let the weight of the moment carry it. They didn't need to artificially enforce it in any way.
And they played something hopeful instead. Yeah.
Well, and that can be a great counterpoint too, when you do that. And I have to say also that, again, talking about a movie just letting its themes play out naturally, one of the things that sounds really pretty when you read it on the page or if you see actors recite it well was like what The Dark Knight was doing, where they literally and explicitly state the themes of the film out loud, as opposed to with Logan, it is all driven by story, by characters speaking and behaving believably, all that kind of stuff. So that's just a way to get your point across in a way that resonates more.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I think that's all the time that we have for today, folks. So why don't we start with Brandon? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, my name is Brandon. I run a YouTube page called Septum Sen versus the World. We are all about physical media and all about the, mostly about the movies. We do reviews. Matter of fact, we are currently working now on not just having the reviews I am doing, but my what's the word? Person working with me on the site. He also is going to be doing some reviews soon. And we also are in a big rush these last couple weeks because Sunday is the Academy Awards, and for us, that's a huge season. So we're going to be doing an analysis. It's already filmed. I just got to finish editing it, and that will be up by the end of the week. And starting next week, we will be doing our analysis of the winners and the Razzie winners too, to kind of offset all of the artsiness.
Cool.
Quick side note: the Razzies, what little credibility that they had, they just threw it out the window when they nominated Darren Aronofsky and Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem and all that stuff. It's like, just because you didn't get it doesn't mean it's bad. Like, in reference to Mother. And I really don't think that the Razzie people know anything more than the Oscar people do necessarily.
Speaking to Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Well, I'm Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker from Charlotte, North Carolina. Proud to say that my latest short film, The Big Blind, is finally done. Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, it's finally done. So I'll be able to get that submitted to festivals and see how it does. That's a film noir, my own film noir throwback, as well as somewhat of a David Lynch homage. So that's happening. I did the proceedings for a film that I submitted for one horror anthology film. Those are all completely done. I finished the behind the scenes documentary, sent it off. They still need to add me on IMDb so I can talk about it and promote it. But that is done. So that's another project done. And then got a web series going on, fan film, another horror short for a different horror anthology. Stay tuned for all of that. It's going to be quite an exciting year. But that was like the big thing, was that project, after 2 years in the making, is finally done.
Alrighty. Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am a horror artist and body positive alternative model. You can find me on Instagram at Third Eye Open. That's 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can find them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I'm a dead girl for Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics horror TV show. And you can find Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics at vimeo.com/DDCC. And I'm also a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. And we are getting ready for a show coming up on April 28th, where we're going to have some awesome burlesque and some punk bands playing. Slaughter Party is going to be celebrating the release of their Psychos in Love CD that's coming out. So we got a big party planned for that. And you can find more information about Grindhouse Tees on Facebook, facebook.com/Grindhouse Tees.
Cool. Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from?
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I'm a I book shows in the Milwaukee area, and I also work for Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics. I'm a dead girl.
Awesome. And do you have any promotional things that you're doing with the band stuff yet, or?
That'll be coming up this spring.
Okay.
I have been working with Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics. I've been on like the last couple episodes. If you've been watching them, they're on Vimeo, like Katie said.
Okay, cool. Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Oh, do what now? Right now I'm killing people in Friday the 13th. But well, I'm in Milwaukee. I go to UW, and I'm a major collector slash fanatic of horror-related media at this point. I have an Instagram where I attempt to show off a small portion of my collection. DHR Hunter, Dustin Horror Hunter, on Instagram. I am also a small-time editor for the Movies Galore blog, and I'm hoping to have my first movie review up relatively soon. So, yeah, I also did. If you want a sample of my previous work, I did an essay for the Reptile Report. It's called Herpetology Horror Show, and it appears pretty quick when you type it into the search engine. So that should give you an idea of what to expect when I start having reviews come out.
Cool. And my name is David Streggy. I run Movies Galore Milwaukee, which is a blog as well as a crew. And I also run Inside Movies Galore, where we talk about films from silent films to present day. We're just moving along relatively slowly. But we will be getting to more films as the year progresses. And before the show, I did an interview with a director from Michigan, called Matthew Jasel, who did a few films. You can find his films at Vid Evil on Store Envy. So definitely check that interview out. And I'm also a small-time producer where I'm working with Dane a little bit. A few projects coming out in the future. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then also keep a lookout for Wrestle Massacre, which is coming out sometime this year. I don't know exactly when, but it's getting closer to that time period. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that will come out eventually this summer. And keep posted for whatever other interviews or films that we have on our to-do list. So in any case, everyone say good night.
Good
Good
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Subscribe.